this big Catholic. Summer camp in the Midwest has been around since the 1930s. I went to the summer camp for 9 years. Difference between the ages of 7 and 16 years old. And in those 9 years, I have not noticed anything too strange except the last year that I went. I was a junior counselor with all my best friends during my last year at camp. This year, the recession, so there was a significant decline in the campers. So many of the cabins needed to be in Armenian job when they had nothing else. What's to do was to go clean them. They keep them from being dusty. So another junior counselor, or JC, was assigned to clean 2 cabins, Kevin D and Kevin C. Captain D was the first cabin, and that's the cabin that I had never been in before. It was rumored to be haunted. Being one of the last campers ever to use the cabin, I knew this was probably not the play spots, so I volunteered to clean cabin. Captain D's one of the smallest and oldest cabins at the camp. It's around 80 years old, so I knew my job would be short. As I went into the cabin, it was what is absolutely freezing, and just to say, it was the hottest day of the year. There was no wind, so it was kind of OD, but I took comfort in knowing that there was nothing obviously here, it was just me. I started sweeping the cabin, which was extremely. After probably 15 minutes or so, I heard what sounded like wrestling behind me. I tried to brush it off as a sudden burst of wind from the tree line, then all of a sudden the 2 screen doors on both sides of the cabin flung open, and what time does the same time? That freaked me the heck out. I dropped the broom on the floor and immediately headed out to the other JC play, who had apparently witnessed the whole thing from cabin C. We abandoned our jobs and decided that we could use so much needed. Later that night, I was asked to bring back the broom I was using because brooms are high commodity here and are used everywhere. And we only had so many. One of my best friends from the camp decided to get the broom from Captain D. I hadn't told him about the doors slamming shutting me earlier in the day, because he would be too chicken to go if I did. So we get to the cabin together, turn on our flashlights to retrieve the broom, and we see it standing straight up on its bristles by itself. We both look at each other, and the broom falls to the ground suddenly. He walks up, thinking I left it like that because it was a common TR. As soon as he walks out the other door, the cabin flies open and slam. We jump and run. Knowing what happened was real, we both saw it with our eyes. We ran back to our cabin we were living in. What's the time? It was maybe only 45 to 50 feet away. I'm cutting the story short here because honestly there's no more reason. What is the throwback to filler detail out? Honestly, they watched to make sure none of us were wasting anybody's time. They went in there and checked it out, never found anybody. But I always felt an eerie feeling walking by. Play that place. I know what we experienced that night, and I know it was something not of this world. For some background, from 1993 to 1998, I attended a Christian youth camp for girls. Every single summer. The camp lasted for 4 days and 3 nights. There were about 200 girls at the camp. About a 1.5 to 2 hour drive from our homes. Some of the camping areas were tent only, and at least one of the camping areas had longhouses, or cabins. The campground is called Ensign Ranch. You can look it up online. See quite a few different camping areas and pictures that are around there. Overall, it's a safe campground. We have a lot of fun there every year. In the evenings, we would tell spooky stories typical for youth camps. On the last night of camp in 1996, I would be about 15 at the time. There were several of us girls on the top of the level of our longhouse. It was basically a 2-story cabin type thing. It was past bedtime, so we were quietly telling scary stories. I said a couple, one of which, with the help of a friend, I'll call her name Lily. I don't remember the specific stories from the night, just typical. And the hook was hanging from the car door type stuff. After a couple of hours of SP cookie stories, someone else was talking and I was exhausted, it could hardly keep my eyes open. Then some of the girls asked me to tell your story, so I did my best to tell something, making it up as I went. Just a typical, on a night in the woods not far from here, type of beginning. The next thing I knew, I woke up, lying flat on my back. As I woke, I realized I was still talking, but I couldn't remember what I was saying or trying to say once I became awake. I was fully awake then, and I finished lately saying something like they all died at the end. I looked around at the girls, staring wide-eyed at me. A couple of the girls were quietly crying, their mouths open in horror and tears streaming down their faces. My friend Lily whispered, "What's the creepiest thing I ever heard?" The girls who weren't crying nodded in agreement. I said I was tired and we should all go to bed. Has all the other girls moved away into their sleeping bags? I asked Lily and the other girl, I'll call her Sarah, what I had said. I told him I'd fallen asleep, I couldn't remember anything. Lily and Sarah exchanged glances and paused before saying, "That just makes it worse." Sarah nodded in agreement. I said she didn't really want to retell it because it was that creepy. Now at this point, if I had just been lately or one of the other girls that were in that group, I wouldn't have thought about it. I probably just thought they were messing with me. But single girl after that, I had the same story and they were all kind of scared of me. I even got in trouble and some sort of punishment for scaring some of the girls because they got scared in the middle of the night and went to see a counselor for help. To this day, I honestly have no idea what creepy story I told. No one there has ever been willing to tell me any details. And several years afterward, Lily told me that she would randomly have nightmares because of it. I'm from a small country in South America. I attended a religious school growing up. And every year you go to the sort of spiritual getaway in a camp situated in an open field next to small river in this sort of forested mountain area. Said that this place is beautiful, but it's always given off a weird vibe, as it's lost in time due to its what structures in outdated any. Because of this, the place has been shrouded in mysteries and horror stories. Burned to the ground in a very gruesome war that almost wiped my country off. Turn off the map in the 1800s. So here's what happened. It was my last year in the school. Our last camp we would ever attend. After a long day, all of my class was tired from hiking the forest next to the camp. So after dinner and a short stay at the campfire, we were all down to go to bed. I was made chiefly of women. We were very few in men, only 6 including myself. So we had the whole dorm hall. This dorm, which was housing only about 16th at the time, was a long hall full of bunk, made for at least 40 or more people. Since we didn't have to share, we all chose top bunks next to each other. 3 on my side, including me, and 3 on the road facing me. It was about mid, and we would just be lying. We are talking, joking, and laughing in the dark since the lights were out after a couple of minutes. Eventually, we would all kind of fall asleep. And that night was no real different. I woke up at the time for what I assumed was somewhere between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. I raised my head from the sheets to see my best friend in his bunk in front of me. He nodded jokingly to the bunk next to him where another classmate was asleep. When I turn, I see the silhouette of my classmate just standing, staring at his bed. Then, before we could, I see the silhouette crouch and notice that my class was already asleep in his bed. Almost at the same time, my friend and I reacted and looked at each other wide-eyed, both of us covering ourselves in our sheets. What's doing our best to try not to be noticed by whatever or whoever this was. But somehow, we managed to fall asleep. The following day went straight to my friend to me before I could finish asking if he saw. And he told me exactly what he saw. It was the same thing that I just described. We approached. What does classmate and explain it to him. Of course he thought we were joking. Both I and my friend remember the events to this day, talking about it every now and then. Almost 7 o'clock, maybe even 8 years after it. I live in South Florida. I am a natural outdoorsy type of person. I like to walk around in the woods in my area, go fishing, for wheeling, etc. I tend to go fishing alone despite my parents always telling me not to, and I usually tell them where I'm going. I often go to places in the middle of nowhere, mainly in field with little ponds and canals to fish in. I can't remember what exact month it was, but it was back when it got dark around 5:30 to 6 p.m. One day, I decided to pack my poles up and go fishing in this field about 30 minutes from my house. Stop being that I lived in a small town. That could be. I was fishing in a spot relatively close to the road near the entrance, and I was gradually making my way down. Mind you, I know this spot very well. So I know how to get in and out of it. It's like a maze of connecting canals, and it's 3:30 and I'm catching fish and getting pretty lucky. What is all anglers know, sometimes the bite wears off and you move to another spot. So I'm moving further from the entrance, and I remember specific landmarks to remember where I'm at, whether be an old tractor or a rundown building. Remember when I said I know this place reasonably well? Well, I remember parts that I always go. I probably should have said that at the beginning. Here we are. So I'm getting to an unfamiliar area, but it's still daytime. So I figured I could remember new landmarks to help me when I'm ready to go at this point it's about. But this spot is in the midst of two different fields that I'm not very familiar with. As I'm going to the site, I hear a hissing sound like it's coming through the fields, but I brush it off, thinking that it's probably just the music that I'm blasting really loud, or maybe the terrain I'm driving on, so I stopped. Halfway to the spot to stop and fish again real quickly, but didn't get a single bite. I packed my things, so as I got to the car, in reverse the car, I heard a strange noise and noticed the tires were hard to turn. I got up and saw my front two tires were completely flat. Mind you, I'm in the middle of nowhere with two flat tires in the... Oh, and did I mention that it was now nighttime? I was never afraid to freak out, but I did get worried. I picked my phone up to call my dad, but to no avail. I had no service and I couldn't even get an SOS. That made my heart stop for a bit, because around this area many bobcats run around these fields. So I just got in the car and began nervously brainstorming on what I should do. I couldn't drive anywhere because of my tires or call anyone. So I'm looking around the car. Sometimes my dad would use my tire pump and would leave it in my trunk. On my last glimmer of hope, I checked the box and Lord behold, my tire was in the cast, and what made it even better is that it was USB powered, meaning I didn't have to plug it into an. So I hooked everything up and started pumping the tires, which took quite some time, probably about an hour. Once they were finally fully pumped, I checked to see what caused the flat. I couldn't see anything. However, I did hear the hissing sound that I had heard earlier. I learned that the hissing sound was the sound of my tire losing. Using R. Thankfully, it was a slow leak, so my tire would retain the R just long enough for me to make it home. Now the only problem is I didn't know where I was. So I was moving around as people did back in the day, you know. No carrying your phone around in the R, hoping to get a signal, and eventually I did. As soon as I did, I Google Maps my way to find the entrance, and from there I remembered where I was and how to get home. I also forgot to mention that I never told anybody about this. I didn't tell my parents that I was going here this day. It's not something I would normally do. But you know, I made a mistake this time. So I think what I really learned was always carry a tire pump in your car. And always tell someone where you are. Because I don't know if I ran over something on my way in. But it was definitely a scary situation, and I'm just glad. Skip to level ahead. Play and figure it out. Play to get. My family owns a cabin in the mountains of Bulgaria. It is my favorite place to escape the summer. My friends from university have a tradition of going there every August for a few days of excessive drinking. However, until last year, we have not experienced anything out of the ordinary per se. On this particular trip, though, I decided to hire a local man. There was a uranium mining operation in the past close by. That was closed down sometime in the 90s. But the workers, about 50 people, still lived in the mining town to paint the tin roof of the hut. Now there are tales of inbreeding and all kinds of weird stuff going on out in this area. So when I met the man, I had a slight chill for a moment when we spoke with him. He was clearly an alcoholic and didn't seem all there. His face was weathered and he was dirty. I paid him, gave him a bottle of rakia, which is a traditional Bulgarian alcohol. And he went on his way. After that, me and my friends spent the rest of the night drinking around the campfire. Then sometime around midnight, the uneasy feeling of being watched from the woods began to play over me, which was too bad because I had to visit the bathroom, which in this case was an outhouse right next to the woods behind us. So I tried to brush off my parano and did whatever I could to save it down deep so I could get some courage. I went out, and not even a minute afterwards someone was banging on the door, which I thought it was one of my friends playing a prank on me. Hence I called out to them to knock it off. And imagine my surprise when they answered from a distance. At that moment, the person on the other side got more adamant and put a knife in the door's crack. This is when I called out for help and turned on the flashlight on my phone, to which the person on the other side of the door retracted the knife and fled up the hill. My friends were scared absolutely out of their mind, but rushed to my aid nonetheless. Sadly, the perpetrator had fled before they got to me. Afterward, we went into the cabin, grabbed all of our stuff, threw it in the car, and we have not gone back since. I haven't told anyone about this yet. I don't know what that man wanted, I really don't. But I'm terrified. I used to go to the mountains every year, multiple times if fate would allow. There's something so peaceful about feeling isolated from the rest of the world. I don't have to look down at my phone. I'm worried about bills or keeping up with my friends. For a brief window of time, it's just me and what the world has created. Every year I would visit the town of Estes and stay overnight, so I could grab an early start and avoid as many people as possible. It had gotten to the point where I was recognized in formed friendships with some of the local, most genuine working at the diners, where I got some fuel before heading up the mountain. Probably knew who I was. My car and I would traverse the Trail Ridge Road, stopping on the viewpoints along the road. I would observe the wildlife. Rolling green would lay out in front of me, daughter with the remnants of snowfall. I would make sure to stop at every given opportunity and take a few good breaths to slowly acclimate myself to the higher altitude and lower intake of oxygen. That's what I used to do anyways. I haven't been back there in a few years now. I think it was 3 years ago now that it happened. It's hard to keep track anymore. Try not to think about it too much. I've had issues with the memories popping back up without much cost. I'm sending me into a fit, my chest. It's all tied and it's hard to breathe. I swear, whatever happens. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My therapist, that I started seeing following the event, told me it might be a good idea to get it out. Write it on paper, or tell people my story. I have no idea if something like this, wow. At this point, I'll try anything. I'd love to finish telling my story. NBO. Take an uninterrupted night's sleep. Like I said, if I ever got the opportunity, one would go back multiple times in a year. Had a decent chunk of vacation time saved up at work. So I decided to take an extra holiday for myself. Everything went about as you'd expect. It was warmer than normal. I got into town the same as always. I booked nearly the same room in the same hotel as the last time I visited, and threw my stuff into the hotel room. Before heading to bed, I made sure to plot out my intended traveling, so I could show someone where I was planning to go. I've been there so many times, and as beautiful as everything was, I like to try and go off the beaten path when I could. In the event something happened to me, I wanted people to know where I was. That's exactly what I did the next morning. I was greeted by the workers at the local diner and made sure to show them the map, telling them when I expected to return. With enough fuel to get me through most of the day, I had it out. The first place I wanted to go was a decent drive up Trail Ridge Road, Lulu City, a place I was surprised that I never gotten around to visiting. Pulling onto the side of the road, I said at the shoulder, looking at the elevation between me and the town. A town that had diminished into a small portion of the horizon. Turning the car off, I was pleasantly surprised to find myself alone on the trail. The fewer people that were around me, the more connected to the environment I could feel. It's like when you watch a movie in the theater. You're so much more immersed when it's quiet. Just a few chattering conversations contain the entire experience. They say with hindsight, it's much easier to see the red flags. When I think back though, it's hard for me to tell when my first sign to turn back really was. You'll hear a lot of sounds walking through the fore, and sounds travel pretty far. So it's hard to say what's unusual and what isn't, even if you've heard something hundreds of times. I remember as I was walking the trail, I heard what sounded like several bones from a distant thunder. The noise happened in rapid succession, like the beating of drums, though the weather hadn't called for such noises. I thought it could have just been the snapping of a nearby tree. Feeling the mountain air fill my lungs, surrounded by trees, all by myself, That was the occasional skittering of wildlife. I even came across a large print in the middle of the trail. I assumed it to be a bear, as black bears have been spotted near the trail. It's a nearly 4-mile hike, which isn't all that bad as the elevation didn't climb too much. Around 2 hours after I initially set out, I found myself looking at the old sign for Lulu City, an old mining town that had been abandoned in the 1800s. I walked slowly through the place. They were all cabins around the area and various plots of land that once served as foundations for more homes. It was incredible to sit in a ghost town nestled near the Rocky Mountains. It was almost as if the place had pushed them out. It seemed like the profit margin for the silver they were mining just wasn't enough to justify. No knowing what I know now, I can't help but wonder if something else was at play. All those years ago, I looked around for a while at the large open area where the town used to sit. There were around 40 cabot, the town's prime. All that remains with the remnants of 3, a few building sites, in a sign for the town. Citing the population was at 200 people. I sat down for a moment, looking at the area surrounding me. Florence and water down my throat, I watched the tree line. There was this creeping sensation you get when someone is staring at the back of your head. I felt that, but it was like I knew where the feeling was coming from, but I couldn't quite see it, as I was focused on an area of trees with a paranoia with stemming from. I thought at first it was just a dark area where the sun had difficulty getting through. As the shadow shifted, however, it was revealed. There was just a dark mask blocking my view. My initial reaction was to just assume the figure was a black bear or an L, but it was hard to convince myself of that, as the shadow reached far too high off the ground. Either way, I just sat and watched. I wasn't about to call any attention to myself, especially if my initial reaction was correct. Add bear mace and the likes, but if I could avoid using it, I would rather do that. With the shadow retreating into the woods, I stood slowly from my spa and decided to exit Lulu. As I turned around, I heard a familiar cracking of trees. This time, however, the sound continued for a good minute or two. It was as if the drums of war had been rung in a warning was shooting through the mountain. I wondered if anyone on the other trails were able to hear the noise, as it was so loud that it made me cover my own ear. As I started retreating from the noise, it stopped, and as I reached the exit to Lulu City, I saw Howie's shadow once more. This time, it was much closer to me. I was able to make out more about it. Part of its dark structure being the antlers atop its head. They weren't the same. Jagged, pointy antlers that decorated the indigenous elk around Rocky Mountain. They were more. Resume playing that of a moose. They were much larger than any paradise seen before, though. Large enough to shovel the snow out of the driveway in one go. I backed up a bit, hearing the foliage bending and cracking under my footsteps. I honestly did not know how to approach the situation, because I did not know what I was looking at. The thing was still shady by the trees, and I couldn't make out its body structure other than it being massive. I wonder, now something of that size was able to move so quickly through the trees. Then I caught a glimpse of the eyes it was using to watch me. It was only when shreds of light reflected off of them. The first 2 shimmering orbs appeared from under its antlers. And then, to my shock, another set of painter than the ones above them appeared, looking at something with such a familiar shape. Yeah, I couldn't decipher what the thing was. I didn't want to keep staring, in case it took direct eye contact as a threat. Averting my gaze, I listened to the creature stumbling around before the commotion caused by their movements dissipated into the foreground. The noise of that thing DST. I decided it was best to leave the area quickly and quietly. Lulu City, its territory, and was giving me a stern warning. I started walking back, ready for the easy hike. Watching the dirt path at my feet, I came across a fresh footprint. Putting my foot into it revealed that my foot didn't even make up half the size of one of its toes. The thing was massive and heavy. Yeah, I didn't want to call my trip short, so as I walked the trail back to my car, I thought I'm just going to the next spot. I had a schedule. I always try to end my visits by looking out over bare leg. It's hard to ignore. I kept my eyes on the trees the whole time, making sure that somehow shadow wasn't lurking. Before I knew it, I was exiting the trail and climbing into my car. With it, in a vehicle spring back to life. It wasn't too long before I got into as far as my car would take me before I had to stop and walk the rest of the way. Surprisingly, once again I found myself alone. There were a few other cars where I parked, but once I got to the lake, I didn't see anyone else in the trail. It felt like everyone had been scared off. Bear Lake is normally a pretty popular spot for people visiting. I had a feeling like I was missing something, like everyone else got a memo that I didn't. I sat for a while in a large border by the side of watching the winds ripple small patterns over the smooth surface of the water. It wasn't off, and you could go there and not hear the howling of screaming children and their parents. So I intended to soak as much of it in as I could. As I sat there, I can see the line of trees on the other side of the lake. The tops of them created an ocean of green that only surrendered to the peaks behind them. I watched that ocean of green sway like a hurricane with sweeping through them. The treetops moved and buckled as I heard familiar smacking noises begin to get louder. The realization dawning on me that whatever I had seen before wasn't warning me. It had been following me and continued to do so as I left the site. I had driven there though. I thought it would be impossible for that thing to be able to admit it here so quickly. With the shifting of the treetops getting closer, I slowly rose to my feet when I saw something eject from the top of the trees. It hung in the air for a moment before crashing down into the lake before me. It was brief, but I saw the object enough to know that the thing had flung a rock rather large, probably bigger than my body, rolled on a rock, and I fell backward, crashing to the ground. My elbow made contact with the hard surface. Falling apart, the fabric of my sweater is slicing through my skin. I opened the small first aid kit I had brought with me, hearing the thunderous noise getting closer. I poured my drinking water onto the wound and wrapped it with a bandage. As I finished tending to the small wound, I noticed that the noise had halted, slowly ignoring the pain in my ankle and the stinging on my elbow. I looked over the rock to see. The trees were no longer swaying, only moving with a gentle push of the wind. Turning slowly, avoiding sudden movement, I saw the bee, at least have been watching me. I saw it bathed in the sun. Every detail. This thing with some twisted amalgamation. It dwarfed me in size. I could have been twice as tall and still not met an eye to eye. I did not know what I was supposed to do, if I was supposed to run or stay still. I watched its pitch black for a rough as it took a step towards me, offering another half out of the bear-shaped nose. Its whole head reminded me of a bear except for the angular structure around its eyes. Its body, again, was reminiscent of a bear that had a bizarre length to it, almost like if it wasn't for the massive paws pushing down into the ground. The thing with top all over, shaking its whole body. Smoking rooms emitted from the open jaw, a jaw in sharp teeth. My reasoning was starting to go out the window, and the years to just run and get the heck out of there was mounting by the moment. I was backing away and had noticed I was making it back to the trail. The creature matched my movements. We were both surrounded by trees, and the thing started moving its head side to side, smacking his large antlers onto the nearby trees, exposing lighter tones. As close as I was, the smashing of the massive antlers against the trees was like a shotgun going off next to your ear. It caused me to hold my hands over my ears as I tried to back away. I wanted to run, but the moment I put too much pressure on my ankle and knew I would buckle. So all I can do was continue the pack away hopping and just hope that it wouldn't charge. It was trying to intimidate me. I watched the maze as if its large frame bulldozed through the trees like it was nothing. I don't know what I did to upset it more than I already had. The clicking noise from its mouth picked up and it charged at me. Footsteps, and before I had time to process what was happening, an antler made contact with me. The memories get off foggy from there. I remember being shunted to the side, my legs colliding with a tree, and I spun out into the bush. Nearly unconscious, I laid surrounded by dirt and leaves as the bear-like creature approached me, smelled me, interested particularly in the blood spilling out of my legs where the bones had broken on impact. I got a good look at his eyes before I passed out. One was the set of eyes that you'd expect to see on a man, while the others were more lizard-like. Those eyes were the last thing I saw before passing out. It was a miracle I ever made it out of there. Some other visitors had heard the commotion and headed over to find me passed out. They stopped my bleeding and got me to the hospital in Estes. I wish I could go hiking still. I'm not afraid of running into that thing again. My legs were beyond repair, and I haven't been able to walk ever since. I still think about that creature. I did as much research as I could but never found anything that looked like that thing. Some monstrous combination of a bear and elk. I wondered if that was the real reason Lulu City was abandoned. Maybe I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't think I'll ever know. Sometimes I hear the clicking noises it made. Every thunderstorm I hear makes me think about the creature bashing its head into the trees. Maybe it did that as a show of strength, like when bucks smack their antlers together. I don't want to believe that's true though, because I couldn't imagine what a behemoth like that needs to prove its strength to. What other secrets could the Rocky Mountains contain? Are there more of those things there? Or perhaps another manner of beast? Every night I go to sleep. I look out my window. I think of those 4 eyes peering at me through the dark, waiting to finish what they started. I'm not sure if I'll ever feel better having written this all out, reading it as I go. I almost don't believe in myself. Maybe I'll feel better if I just convinced myself nothing ever happened, that I just fell and tumbled hard enough to crack the bones in my legs like twigs. I'll be able to get some sleep,